Hello and welcome back to RPG PhD. I'm Dr. Ben and today we're talking about something we often forget exists in role-playing games. Silence. In a medium built around imagination, description, and dialogue, silence can feel unnatural, even uncomfortable. But if we borrow from theater, film, and storytelling theory, silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's a presence. It's a tool that shapes meaning, heightens tension, and invites reflection. In this episode, we'll explore how pauses, breath, and silence can create tension, immersion, and emotional weight at the table. We'll dig into the psychology of silence, its theatrical roots, and how you can apply it in everything from horror games to high fantasy. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a game master can say is nothing at all. Silence, as playwright Harold Pinter once said, is full of sound. What he meant is that silence doesn't erase meaning, it intensifies it. It gives the audience, or in our case, the players, space to feel instead of simply hear. Let's start with a bit of theory, because silence, as simple as it seems, is one of the most sophisticated storytelling tools we have. In theater, film, and narrative psychology, silence is never truly empty. As one playwright famously observed, there are two silences. One when no word is spoken, and one that occurs beneath words that are spoken. The first kind is literal, the air between lines. The second kind is emotional, the silence inside a moment, the tension that lingers beneath the surface. Both can be used at the table. When we speak, our words occupy space. They give structure and rhythm to the fiction. But silence shapes that space. It defines where the weight falls. It's the negative space in a painting, or the rest between musical notes. Without it, everything blends together into noise. In tabletop storytelling, silence acts as a kind of emotional punctuation, turning a steady flow of talk into something that breathes. In role-playing, we often focus on what we say, the next description, the next NPC voice, the next mechanical resolution. But silence has its own syntax. It says, listen, consider, feel. And unlike words, it invites collaboration. When a game master stops talking, players start thinking. Their imaginations rush in to fill the vacuum. That's what gives silence its power. From a psychological perspective, silence heightens focus. Social scientists studying conversational rhythm, what's called turn-taking theory, have found that a pause of even 2 seconds feels meaningful to listeners. It signals change, tension, contemplation, or emotional weight. In an RPG, that momentary gap in the flow of speech causes a shared rise in attention. Players lean forward, their breathing slows, the scene tightens. Roger Caillois in Man, Play, and Games defines 4 central modes of play: competition, chance, role play, and vertigo. Silence, interestingly, evokes that dizzying sense of disorientation. When the normal rhythm of the table breaks, the players feel a subtle vertigo. The familiar collapses into expectation. They know something is coming, they just don't know what. That's not discomfort by accident, it's tension by design. From a theatrical lens, silence is a performer's tool for presence. In acting training, particularly in Stanislavski's system and later in Meisner technique, stillness and silence are used to draw the audience's gaze, to let emotion radiate without being verbalized. The audience feels what the character feels, not because of dialogue, but because of what's not said. In that way, silence is participation. It allows others to meet you halfway, to project their own meaning into the moment. When we translate that to tabletop, it becomes a shared imaginative silence. The game master's pause becomes a canvas, and the players' imaginations paint on it. They interpret, anticipate, and emotionally prepare. This is why silence is never neutral, it's charged. We can even view silence through the lens of game design theory. Jesper Juhl in Half Real reminds us that games exist between the real and the fictional, between rule systems and emotional interpretation. Silence inhabits that same liminal space. It's not part of the rules, but it influences how the rules feel. It exists between the mechanics and the story, mediating their emotional texture. Think about the act of rolling dice. The roll itself is a kind of silence, a momentary suspension between intent and outcome. The players have acted, but the result hasn't yet arrived. That gap, that half second before the die lands, is pure narrative potential. It's the heartbeat of drama. Silence operates on that same wavelength. It's not empty time, it's potential energy. So, when we talk about using silence at the table, what we really mean is learning to control rhythm, the push and pull between sound and stillness, description and absence, control and surrender. Silence creates contrast, and contrast is what gives emotion its depth. A scene full of chaos only feels chaotic if it's preceded by calm. A moment of horror only lands if there's been quiet before the scream. A confession only matters if there's stillness before it's spoken. That's why silence is not a break in immersion, it's a deepening of it. When used intentionally, it becomes a participatory silence where everyone at the table contributes to the tension without a single word. Silence makes the table listen. It reminds everyone this isn't just a conversation. It's a ritual, a performance, a shared act of creation, the game itself. And in that ritual, every pause carries meaning. When we think about tension at the table, we usually imagine noise, shouting, dice rolling, music swelling. But real tension doesn't come from volume, it comes from expectation. And nothing creates expectation like silence. Silence is the tightening of the string before it snaps. It's the moment before the monster moves, the breath before the confession, the single heartbeat before the die lands. The audience, or in this case, the players, can feel that tension physically. Their bodies lean in, their breathing sinks, their attention sharpens. That's the power of a well-timed pause. In storytelling theory, this is known as the pregnant pause, a silence charged with potential energy. Theater director Peter Brook describes it as the invisible current between performer and audience. On stage, that pause isn't empty, it's alive. The same applies to role-playing games. A pause doesn't break immersion, it focuses it. From a psychological standpoint, silence activates what cognitive scientists call anticipatory processing, the brain's predictive mechanism that kicks in when we're unsure what comes next. It's the same neurological pattern that makes horror films terrifying when the soundtrack cuts out. In those moments, the brain starts racing to fill in the void. Players' imaginations begin to co-author the fear. In game terms, silence shifts the emotional responsibility from the game master to the table. You're not telling the players what to feel, you're giving them space to feel it. This is especially potent in horror games, where the unknown is scarier than anything you could describe. For example, in a game of Call of Cthulhu, the investigators open the door to the flooded cellar. The lantern light spills down the stairs, but the bottom is lost in shadow. You hear something. Not movement, not breathing, but presence. Then, nothing. And you stop talking. You don't describe the smell, or the sound, or the shape. You let the silence hang. In that gap, the players' imaginations go to work, and whatever they imagine is far worse than anything you could narrate. The silence becomes a design tool for terror. Silence works in fantasy adventure games too, but for a different emotional register. In Dungeons & Dragons, tension often builds toward action. The quiet before combat is started. For example, in a D&D game, the goblins fall still. Even the torches seem to hesitate. Across the cavern, something exhales. Heavy, slow, ancient. Roll initiative. That short silence before roll initiative turns a mechanical transition into a cinematic beat. You've used sound and silence to mark the moment as important, to say something's changed. This works because silence manipulates rhythm, the tempo of your storytelling. If everything's delivered at the same emotional speed, your players stop listening. But if you vary rhythm, you talk fast in action, then go utterly still when danger looms, you re-engage their attention through contrast. In Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, where dread and fatalism are part of the world's DNA, silence can embody the oppressive weight of that setting. For example, you crest the hill overlooking the Reich. The town below is gone. Just smoke and the faint toll of a single bell. What do? That pause isn't just aesthetic, it's moral. It gives the players a second to feel the horror before the mechanics catch up. It's the same device used in classic Gothic fiction, revelation through restraint. Silence isn't only useful before the danger, it's just as powerful after it. The post-combat quiet, the aftermath, the space where adrenaline fades and shock sets in, that's where meaning lives. Think about Alien RPG. When the motion tracker goes quiet and all the noise stops, that's when the fear peaks. The silence isn't safety, it's threat deferred. A promise that the horror isn't gone, just waiting. Or in Blades in the Dark, a game about risk and consequence, a pause before you reveal a role's outcome can stretch tension across the entire table. For example, you slip the dagger into the noble's sleeve pocket, your eyes on the guards. I'm going to make this a desperate roll. Go ahead and roll. That pause between the setup and the roll is the drama. It's where the player's anticipation meets the uncertainty of fate. And when you finally reveal the result, success or disaster, the release feels earned because the silence built up to it. Silence works because it creates contrast and engagement, two things every game session needs. Without moments of quiet, emotional peaks blur together. Without pauses, there's no rhythm. One film editor notes that a perfect cut happens when it reflects what the audience is feeling, not just what they're seeing. Silence functions the same way. It should reflect what your players are feeling, not what the characters are doing. So when the table goes quiet, don't rush to fill it, trust it. The pause is doing the emotional labor for you. It's telling your players something is happening and you're part of it. In game design language, silence transforms a linear moment into a ludonarrative beat, a space where the story and mechanics synchronize through emotion rather than description. Think of silence as your invisible orchestra conductor. You're not stopping the music, you're shaping it. You're changing tempo, building expectation, drawing the player's attention to the spaces between action. Used deliberately, silence is not the absence of play, it's the height of play. Silence isn't always about fear or tension. Sometimes it's about depth, the moment when the table stops doing and starts feeling. In games full of dice rolls, laughter, and strategy, we often forget that immersion doesn't always come from action. It comes from attention. From letting the fiction breathe long enough that players actually have space to process what just happened. Silenced, used well, creates that breathing room. It lets the emotional impact of a scene land before anyone rushes to fill the void. Psychologists who study group dynamics, particularly in improvisational performance, note that silence is often where meaning consolidates. It's the space where participants subconsciously digest emotion and reorient themselves. In role-playing, that's when immersion deepens. When we leave a moment unspoken, the players' minds fill it in. Neuroscientists studying narrative engagement refer to this as empathetic simulation, the process by which listeners or viewers imagine themselves inside a story. Silence invites that simulation to complete itself. It's not empty time, it's the audience stepping into the fiction. So when something major happens, a death, a revelation, a betrayal, and you let silence hang, you're not stalling the story. You're letting the players' emotional brains catch up to their narrative ones. In theater, we talk about the dramatic breath. It's the moment after a powerful line where nothing else can or should follow. The silence becomes part of the performance, a moment of communal exhale. You can use the same technique in role-playing games. After a major event, don't rush to the next scene. Take a breath, literally. Let the table sit with it. Look around. You'll often see the shift happen physically. Players' shoulders drop. They stare at their dice. Someone sighs or laughs softly. That's the moment immersion can be deepest because the players have become participants in the silence. This isn't passive storytelling, it's shared authorship. Everyone is processing the fiction together. For example, in a Blades in the Dark game, the crew has just completed a dangerous score. They've succeeded, barely, but their actions have left a beloved contact dead. The vault door creaks open. The treasure's there, but so is Bazo's body. The smoke curls up towards the rafters. You can smell burned gunpowder. And regret. Then you stop. Don't describe the loot. Don't cut to the payoff roll. Just let it hang. That silence is an absence. It's the echo of consequence. The players need it. The fiction needs it. When someone finally breaks the quiet, maybe with a joke or a sigh or a whispered, "We shouldn't have done this," that's real immersion. The silence made it possible. So here's another example from Vampire the Masquerade. After a feeding scene when the character takes more blood than they meant to, don't jump to dice or damage. You look down, the mortal's still. The city hums around you, oblivious. Blood stains your wrist. The beast inside purrs. And then, nothing. Let the quiet sit like guilt. Let it stretch until the player speaks first. That silence is the morality system. You don't need mechanics to show shame. You need silence. This mirrors the principle of negative capability, a term coined by poet John Keats, the idea that true art often lives in ambiguity, in what's left unsaid. The same holds true for emotional immersion in tabletop role-playing games. Silence allows ambiguity to breathe. In high-action games like D&D, silence can also mark emotional rhythm, a moment of contrast after chaos. The dragon collapses into the chasm, its roar fading into the dark. The battlefield goes quiet. Only the rain remains. Don't rush to announce XP, treasure, or the next encounter. Let the player sit in the aftermath. Maybe one picks up a fallen comrade's weapon. Maybe someone starts to laugh, not from joy but from relief. That's immersion. This shared emotional decompression after intensity. It's what Joseph Campbell described as the return phase of the hero's journey, when the hero comes home changed. Silence is the bridge between ordeal and transformation. Maybe you're in a game of cyberpunk. In Cyberpunk Red, silence often represents alienation, the emptiness beneath neon. When a character makes a morally ambiguous choice, let the world go quiet. The screen glows with the message, "Transfer complete, 40,000 eddies." Enough to live comfortably for months. Outside, the rain hits the glass, the city lights flicker. Somewhere below, someone screams. But up here, it's quiet. That silence isn't peace, it's isolation. It immerses the players not through excitement, but through emotional realism. The world keeps spinning, but the character is left alone with what they've done. The paradox of silence is that it brings people closer. It strips away performance and noise until all that's left is attention. Game designer Robin Laws, in Hamlet's Hit Points, talks about the rhythm of upbeats and downbeats in narrative, the alternation between hope and despair, tension and release. Silence is the breath between those beats. It's where emotion lives, where meaning resonates. In that sense, silence is a connector. It turns a collection of individuals around a table into a single listening audience. And when the next word finally comes, when someone breaks that shared quiet, it lands with 10 times the force. That's not just immersion, that's theater, that's communion. So when we talk about silence as immersion, we're really talking about presence. The ability to hold a moment, not rush past it, and let the players feel the weight of the world they helped create. Silence doesn't take players out of the story, it drops them deeper into it. It's not a void, it's a well. Not all silence is tension or immersion. Sometimes silence is respect. There are moments in tabletop role-playing when words would cheapen what's just happened. When the right thing to do isn't to describe more, but to say nothing at all. Silence in those moments becomes reverence, a recognition that the story has crossed a threshold, that something has ended, changed, or been revealed. In both theater and ritual, there's a concept called the sacred pause. It's the moment when the audience and the performers share the same breath, when action stops, but the meaning is still unfolding. Anthropologist Victor Turner, in The Ritual Process, describes this as liminality, the in between space where transformation occurs. Silence at the table often occupies that liminal space. It's the pause between who the characters were and who they're becoming. After a major death, a revelation, or a moment of grace, silence marks the transition. It's how the story acknowledges that something real has happened. It's easy as game master to feel pressure to move on, to fill the quiet, to lighten the mood. But when we rush those moments, we rob them of their gravity. Silence gives weight to sacrifice. It says this mattered. In Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, survival itself is often tragic. After a brutal session, the silence that follows isn't victory, it's exhaustion. The last of the beastmen flees into the trees. The rain starts again. You're alive, but barely. The priest's sermon echoes faintly from the hills, swallowed by the mud and the storm. Then pause. Let that bleakness breathe. In that stillness, the players understand the tone of the world. That this is a setting where triumph and despair live side by side. The silence becomes world building. It's not just quiet, it's the sound of the old world exhaling. In 10 Candles, silence is built into the structure of play. Each time a candle goes out, the players pause, reflect, and whisper a memory into the dark. The game's tragedy isn't shouted, it's whispered. That ritual silence transforms the experience from horror to elegy. The players become mourners, witnesses to their own fading light. It's no coincidence that this shared silence is the emotional climax of the game, because silence is the only language that can hold collective grief. In the One Ring, journeys are long, quiet, and contemplative. After battle or hardship, the game master might describe the road stretching on, the mountains watching in silence. Days pass without word. The wind moves through the pines, carrying the memory of what was lost. No dialogue needed. The silence itself carries Tolkien's core theme, that beauty and sorrow coexist. That the greatest stories aren't just about what's said, but what's endured. Silence at the table isn't just aesthetic, it's ethical. It's about acknowledging that player emotions, joy, grief, anger, are real in the moment. It gives space for reflection, for empathy, for emotional honesty. In performance theory, Erica Fisher-Licht calls this auto-poetic feedback, the self-generating loop between audience and performer. In role-playing, the same thing happens. Silence becomes the connective tissue between players' emotions and characters' experiences. When you allow silence to exist, you're saying to your players, you're safe to feel something here. So now that we've talked about silence as tension, immersion, and respect, let's get practical. How do you use silence at your table, intentionally, gracefully, and without making it awkward? Let's break it down into a few core techniques. First, mind your body language. Silence only works if it feels intentional. When you stop speaking, your posture, gaze, and breath all communicate to your players whether that silence is part of the story or a mistake. If you slump or glance at your notes, they'll assume you've lost your place. But if you keep eye contact, steady, still, they'll feel the weight of the pause. Think of yourself as a stage actor or conductor. You're cueing attention without words. The door creaks open, and beyond it, you see movement. Pause. Look up. Hold eye contact. Don't move. In that stillness, the player's attention sharpens. Their imaginations fill the gap. Your silence invites them in. If you struggle with this, practice pausing at the end of your key sentences and just breathing once before speaking again. That one extra breath signals authority and confidence. And it trains the table to lean in. Next, match silence to context. Not all silences are the same. Some are sharp, a shock pause, and others are deep, an emotional rest. The key is to match the length and tone of your silence to the moment. So short pauses, 1 to 3 seconds, build suspense, highlight detail, or emphasize a turning point. Medium pauses, between 5 and 10 seconds, create dread, anticipation, or introspection. And then long pauses, 10 or more seconds, signal emotional transformation, loss, or reverence. You reach for the gem, short pause, and it's warm. Longer pause, too warm. The short pause draws attention. The long one lets realization bloom. Varying silence is like playing with tempo in music. Contrast makes it powerful. Too much silence and players disengage. Too little and moments blur together. Find the rhythm your story needs. Next, signal tone with breath. In acting and directing, breath is pacing. A quick inhale signals tension, a slow exhale signals release. As the game master, your breathing rhythm sets the table's emotional rhythm. Before key moments, try slowing your breath. Players subconsciously mirror it. That psychological mirroring builds group coherence, what sociologists call entrainment, the synchronization of emotional rhythm within a group. For example, in Alien RPG, the motion tracker clicks once, then twice, then nothing. What do? That controlled breathing is invisible direction. You've cued fear without raising your voice or adding sound. Next, trust the table. Silence can feel terrifying to a game master, not because of what's happening in the story, but because of what's happening in you. We're conditioned to fill space. In conversation, silence feels like failure. But in storytelling, silence is power. Your players will only trust silence if you do. So the next time you feel the urge to fill a quiet beat with narration, resist it. Count to 3. Wait. The magic almost always happens just after the moment you would have spoken. That's the rule of dramatic silence. It's not about withholding information, it's about inviting participation. Also, use visual focus. When silence works through sound or the lack of it, you can reinforce it with visuals. When you stop speaking, fix your gaze somewhere meaningful. A player's eyes, a dice roll, or an imagined point in space. Players instinctively follow your focus. If you look down or fidget, the silence breaks. If you hold focus, it becomes ritualized. The final candle flickers. The room goes dark. You look at the players. You hold their gaze. The lack of sound and movement makes it sacred. This isn't theater trickery, it's directing attention. Silence without focus is confusion. Silence with focus is gravity. Also, end silence with intention. The way you end a silence is just as important as how you start it. When you break a pause, do it like a conductor bringing in the orchestra. Clear, deliberate, rhythmic. If you've just built suspense, end with a sharp change. And then the lights go out. If you've created emotional resonance, end softly. The storm passes. Morning comes. Avoid nervous laughter or rushed transitions. They undercut the moment. The player's emotions are hanging on your next word. Deliver it with care. Layer silence with sound. Sometimes silence works best when it's not absolute. Subtle sound design like wind, dripping water, or dice rolling softly can make silence feel alive rather than empty. Musicologists call this threshold sound, sound that barely registers consciously but deepens immersion. In your games, you can use background audio to sculpt your silences. Fade music down, not out. So in a game of Call of Cthulhu, you step into the flooded chamber. The water is still. You pause. You let the faint dripping sound loop. Something just moved beneath the surface. That faint ambient cue keeps silence charged with potential energy. Use ritual to prepare for silence. You can train your group to value silence by ritualizing it. Before a session, explain there may be moments when you'll go quiet on purpose, to let scenes breathe or to mark emotion. This primes players to interpret silence as intentional rather than awkward. You can even build short rituals into your campaign. A moment of quiet before rolling initiative. A breath together before a big reveal. A shared pause after each character death. Or a session finale. So before major battles, the Game Master says, take a breath. Your characters know they might not return. Calibrate silence by table culture. Every group has its own rhythm. Some tables thrive on clatter and quips. Others sink naturally into cinematic pacing. Knowing how your players respond to quiet is crucial. At first, they might joke through pauses. That's normal. Don't force gravity on a group that isn't ready for it or doesn't enjoy it. Instead, introduce silence gradually. Start with 2-second beats in key moments and expand from there. When players start whispering rather than joking, when they lean in instead of leaning back, you'll know you've earned their trust in silence. Using silence, like any technique, takes practice. But once a group learns how to listen together, those shared pauses become some of the most memorable moments you'll ever create. Finally, remember you are not only the game master, you are the director of pacing. Silence is your invisible editing tool. Every pause changes rhythm. Every breath resets the emotional tempo of the story. The difference between an okay session and a great one often comes down to rhythm, and silence is the beat that makes rhythm possible. A famous film editor once said, "A cut is a lie told to make the truth better." The same goes for silence. It's a tool of illusion that reveals emotional truth. Whether you're running grim horror, political intrigue, or slapstick comedy, silence allows your story to expand. It gives weight to laughter, pain to tragedy, and awe to discovery. Using silence effectively is like learning to play an instrument. At first it feels mechanical, a trick you're trying to remember. But with practice it becomes instinctual. You start to feel when the story needs to breathe, when tension needs to stretch, and when reverence needs room. When you master silence, your sessions gain rhythm, intimacy, and emotional texture. You're no longer just describing a world, you're conducting one. Up to this point, we've talked about silence as a performative choice, something you, as a game master or player, can use in the moment. But silence also has a place at the design level. Silence isn't just a storytelling technique, it's a mechanical philosophy. And when we build systems that anticipate silence, that leave intentional spaces for reflection, tension, and emotional rhythm, we end up creating games that feel more human, more alive, and more memorable. In most traditional tabletop role-playing games, D&D, Pathfinder, Warhammer, every rule is built to fill space. Combat rounds, turns, dialogue, skill checks. Silence exists only between actions, not as part of them. But the moment we start treating silence as a designed component, everything changes. Jesper Juhl in Half Real reminds us that games exist in the tension between rules and fiction, between systems and stories. Silence occupies that middle space. It's where the rules end and emotion begins. When we create mechanical space for stillness, pauses between outcomes, scenes, or even dice rolls, we're building emotional affordances. We're saying to players, this is a moment to feel, not just to act. Silence, in other words, can be baked into the loop. The easiest way to include silence in design is to make it a ritual. Some of the most emotionally powerful games already do this, often in subtle ways. In 10 Candles, every time a candle is extinguished, players must pause, speak a memory, and sit in darkness. The silence is not just atmospheric, it's procedural. The game requires the group to reflect, to grieve, to listen. In The Quiet Year, players draw cards and narrate changes in their community, but the game explicitly ends with a moment of sudden, permanent silence. The Frost Shepherds arrive. The game is over. No epilogue, no debrief, just quiet. That absence is the design's closing chord. In Dread, the physical act of pulling a Jenga block creates silence. Every hand tremor, every held breath is part of the mechanic. The game's terror comes not from gore or monsters, but from waiting and anticipation. All these examples use silence as ritualized tension, a predictable but emotionally charged moment that becomes part of the system's rhythm. By formalizing silence, designers shift it from being a performance skill to being a shared expectation. Silence can also be treated like a resource, something to spend, earn, or protect. Imagine a mechanic where players can use silence to communicate wordlessly. A single unspoken decision per session that carries extra narrative power. Or a moment of quiet. A token that allows a player to pause the scene and describe what their character is thinking rather than what they're doing. This kind of mechanic turns silence into a narrative currency. It mirrors the flashback mechanic in Blades in the Dark. But instead of rewriting time, it reclaims attention. Some experimental games already explore this. Dialect, a game about dying languages, includes rounds where players simply draw symbols or gestures instead of speaking. The silence becomes communication, a commentary on loss. By treating silence as a limited or shared resource, designers can make players value it, not as a void but as a choice. Designing for emotional pacing. Silence is a pacing tool, and pacing is one of the hardest things to design. Most tabletop role-playing games rely on external pacing, the game master's instincts, the table's energy. But games can include internal pacing cues that prompt silence at specific times. Designers can formalize that rhythm, adding mechanical pauses between narrative peaks and troughs to prevent emotional burnout. So, for example, after a major conflict, the game text might instruct, pause. Each player describes one image or sound from the aftermath. No one responds for 10 seconds. Or, when the prophecy is revealed, the game master and players take one collective breath before anyone speaks. These aren't just atmospheric flourishes, they're emotional regulators. They help groups metabolize intensity, preventing what designer Miguel Sicart calls ethical fatigue, the emotional numbness that comes from too much, unrelenting drama. Incorporating silence into pacing loops builds emotional sustainability in play. There's also diegetic silence. Silence is part of the fiction. Silence doesn't have to be out of character. It can live inside the fiction itself. In some settings, horror, space, post-apocalyptic wastelands, silence is part of the world's texture. Game mechanics can reflect that. In Alien RPG, silence could function as a measurable condition. When players stay quiet for a scene, they gain stealth bonuses, but tension increases. In Mothership, silence could be written into the panic mechanic. Breaking a quiet space might trigger cascading stress effects. In Vampire the Masquerade, silence might be treated as social dominance. The character who speaks least holds the most power. These mechanics align silence with fiction, making the experience of quietness part of the narrative's logic. The final step is simple but crucial. We have to write silence into the text itself. Game design is pedagogy. It teaches how to play through structure and tone. If silence is meant to be part of the experience, the text must explicitly instruct it. Simple textual cues like this reframe silence from performance flourish to procedural expectation. 10 Candles, Dread, and The Quiet Year do this wonderfully. Their rulebooks read like stage directions. They don't just tell you what to do, they tell you how it should feel. That's where silence lives, not in omission, but in design intention. When we write silence into our designs, we stop thinking of it as a gap and start treating it as a mechanic. We give our games rhythm, empathy, and breath. Silence teaches pacing without policing it. It creates emotional resonance without prescribing tone. It's not a bug in the system, it's the heartbeat of it. So whether you're designing an epic campaign, a one-shot horror, or a minimalist indie game, ask yourself this: where does your game breathe? Because when you design the breath, the silence, you're not just shaping what players do, you're shaping what they feel. Silence is one of the oldest tools in storytelling. From Greek tragedy to Pinter's plays to modern horror films, and yet it's one we rarely think about in tabletop games. But at the table, silence is power. It's tension, reverence, anticipation, and meaning all rolled into one. When you use silence intentionally, you remind your players that this isn't just a game of dice and numbers, it's a shared act of storytelling. Every pause is a chance to let emotion breathe, to make space for awe, or to let the weight of the world settle in. So, next time you sit behind the screen, remember, you don't always have to fill the space. Sometimes, the most profound storytelling happens in the spaces between words. So, let me know how you use silence at your table in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into silence, please hit that like and subscribe button, as it helps the channel and I personally appreciate it so much. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.